Well, if you turn into 1 Timothy chapter 3 as we work our way through this book, and Lord permitting, we'll go through 1 and 2 Timothy. As 2 Timothy has a lot about end times, and we want to talk about that a little bit because it seems to be the topic today, end times. And we'll share again that we're looking, I have Dr. Jeremiah's video series coming on the end times, the great disappearance. And him and his staff got together and tried to figure out every angle about the rapture. What's leading up to it, what happens afterward, who will be in there, who will not, all those things there. So we're looking at, and we I think we're going to share it on Wednesday nights. If we had Sunday night services, I would share it on a Sunday night. But anyhow, if you would be up to something like that, we could do that too. Because I would like to show it in its entirety. There's 5, so that would mean 5 Sundays nights you'd have to commit to. And if you'd like to do that, you let me know, and we can do that. Anyhow, we're in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and verses 1 through 7. As we look at the checklist for choosing church leaders. And I was thinking about this. So envision yourself that you're on the pastor supply committee. And you're in that group that's going to pick a new pastor. Or, now our church works a little different. We have pastor and deacons. And we'll look at deacons later. But a lot of churches have elders and deacons. Three Rivers Bible Church does. First Baptist Church in Newburgh does. And so, elder board. So often the church family would be voting on someone to be an elder or to be a deacon. Or as just happened up to Berean, they just got a new pastor. And so just think, you're going to pick one out. So Paul says to Timothy, here's some things you need to have, some qualifications for a pastor or for an elder. And then he'll go on to share for a deacon. And so that's what's here. But before that, we're going to talk about The Lion King. Everyone watch The Lion King? Yeah. I watched those several times with my youngins. And The Lion King. And death had crept over the Pride Lands like a gray-green shadow. The ground once covered with a mane of windswept grass and spotted blossoms now had the look of reptile skin left to dry and crack under the African sun. Brittle branches, the only remnants of vegetation, jutted from the parched land like lifeless claws. The earth once rumbled under the galloping hooves of antelopes and wildebeests, but it was silent now, strewn with skulls and bones picked clean by hungry hyenas. One lion was responsible for this desolation, Scar. If you remember him, he had usurped the throne by murdering his brother King Mufasa and driving Simba, the king's son and rightful heir, out of Pride Rock. And he had given free rein to the bitter enemies of Mufasa, the hyenas, allowing these trespassing scavengers to roam and ravage the countryside, their reward for helping Scar kill the king. From a cliff on the outskirts of Pride Land, Simba, now a full-grown lion, scowls as he surveyed what was left of his homeland. The real king had at last returned, and it was time to take Pride Rock back. To do that, he must challenge Scar. You'll have to watch the show to get the interest of the story. But that video, Lion King, and like I said, I watched it many times. But what I want you to take out of that is The Lion King contains an important message about leadership. Character matters at the top. Character matters at the top. Though Scar had the title of king, he didn't qualify for the position. He used the throne to feed his appetite for power and position rather than care for his kingdom. Abusive and irresponsible leadership exists in the real world too. A quick scan of history reveals a whole list of scars in the Bible. We had Jezebel, We had Herod. We had Nero. We had Hitler. We had Amin. We had Hussein. People with authority but no character. Unfortunately, the secular world is not the only place with leadership problems. The body of Christ has its share too. Insecure and manipulative pastors and elders have ravaged congregations and split churches. Some leaders have trouble controlling their own passions. They can't lead themselves, much less others. You hear those who have affairs in the church and have to leave their ministry. And in the last 6 months, a year, some of those in big churches. I'm talking mega churches. Their pastor had to step down because he couldn't control his own passions, having affairs. Matter of fact, we had one who had to step down from his ministry in Chicago who couldn't control his financial greed and had to step down from a big ministry. As a fact, I actually got to hear the guy speak a couple times and read some of his books. Just excellent stuff. But somewhere along the line, he didn't stay under the leadership of the Lord Jesus Christ and has some issues. Some are more focused on programs and personal holiness, creating a busy ministry that lacks the core of Christ-likeness. And being busy doesn't mean you're spiritual. And just because your church has lots of activities doesn't mean it's spiritual. Now, on the opposite side of that, doesn't mean because they have lots of activities they're not spiritual. But you got to go back to the core of that, and we'll look at that. And so Paul gives him a list here in 1 Timothy 3 for picking leaders. And I have some erroneous methods there for you on your outline. Number one, popularity. It's in far too many churches, charisma, visibility in the community, and professional success qualify an individual for leadership. The upfront types appear the most confident, capable, enthusiastic. But popularity alone, however, is an unreliable barometer for determining leadership, skill, wisdom, or character. And there's a whole lot of difference of the qualities that you have in a leader in your business than in a leader in your church, is what he's saying. The past. Many congregations choose leaders, those who have been leaders in the past. It's a tradition to have a Jones on the elder board, Sam Jones might say. His father was an elder for 40 years, so Sam wants to be for the next 40. Of course, if you're in small churches, you know, and I can pick on Bill for this one, because see, you go on to be a deacon for a little bit, and you're there a long time, right, Bill? You know, it's just the way it works in smaller churches, and that's all right. And I'm picking on Bill because he was there a long time, and he was there before I got here. And anyhow, churches that choose leaders by tradition rather than biblical qualifications end up with a board of great historians, but poor visionaries. And here's one that goes with that. There's more to leading than doing it the old way. And I'm going to tell you, I'm a hard one to buck tradition. I kind of like the old way. There's nothing wrong with some things in the old way, but you got to be open to something maybe in the new way. That's why you see this TV over here in that Sunday school class. We've never done it that way before. Oh boy. Why not, right? It's available. Dr. David Jeremiah is a fantastic biblical teacher, and his successful ministry has proven that. But anyhow, but he would tell you the same thing that I'm telling you. Politics. Some people get into leadership by slick political maneuvering, pulling the right strings, massaging the right people, shaking the right hands, throwing around weight in the right places. Remember, it's not what you know or who you are that matters. It's who you know and how well you play the game. That's our politics in today's world, right? I I'll pick on the politicians. We've got a bunch of political idiots out there. So there we go. There's my statement for the day. How do I know that? Because the record reflects it and the condition of our country says it. So there we go. I'm just going from the track record. There are some good men and women out there too. So I didn't say everybody. I just said there's some. And a congregation that allows such leaders to slip in usually wake up, find themselves exploited instead of edified. And so the last one is pocketbook. Money can't buy everything, but in some churches it can get you a seat on the elder board. We're not talking about a bribe, but we're talking something more subtle, because people often assume because a person is wealthy, he owns a business, that he's qualified for leadership in the church. Careful though, wealth doesn't necessarily signal integrity. It doesn't signal lack of integrity. But more important than financial successes are character qualities like humility, teachable spirit, something that money can never buy, right? Otherwise, God expects his leaders in the church to be a little different than a lot of times we expect. I've seen guys that folks say, man, I can just tell by looking at him, he's going to be a good leader. Oh boy. What does that mean? Just because he dresses nice, looks nice, speaks well, you just set yourself up for the Antichrist. He's going to look good, he's going to speak well, and everyone says, all right. Watch out for those kind of things, because I think that if the Apostle Paul walked in here and got up here to speak, you might thinking, oh boy, where do we get that guy? Remember, he was a Jew that was balding in the middle, Tom, like me and you. And he had crooked legs, they said, and a crooked nose. And he'd been beaten, remember, and shipwrecked. And he just looked like he was ready to go to heaven, which the Lord took him. And wouldn't be exactly like we expected sometimes to step into the pulpit. So there we go. And we might not even like what he had to say because he would put his finger on things. But now we look at this inerrant list here in chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. And I'm going to read those. We're just going to look at a couple verses today. But anyhow, this is a faithful saying, chapter 3, verse 1. If a man desires the position of a bishop, that could be overseer, elder, or pastor. And those will all fit in there. He desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine. Oh, man. I have to tell you, I haven't had any wine. I haven't had any wine since I don't remember when, but I hadn't had anything to drink since 1984. So I guess there we go on that one. But anyhow, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. And then, of course, the next verse we'll look at deacons. So now we're looking at elders. First, we must understand that the list applies to male candidates for the office of pastor or elder or bishop or overseer. It's pretty there. It says what? The husband of one wife. Okay? Also says that he has to rule his household what? Well. So we see it's a male, talking about a male there. The male that you and I know of. Males. And the ones that can have babies, praise God. I don't know why anybody would want that. There's two things that women are blessed with. Having babies and the menstrual cycle. So, Lord, glad I don't have to mess with either one of those. Hormones was enough. And so there we go. Not that women don't or shouldn't demonstrate many of these same qualities we see here, but Scripture limits this office to men. Men, after all, remember we looked in verse 8 and verse 12, they're supposed to take charge in the church. Men are supposed to be prayer warriors in the church. He said he doesn't allow women to be in a place of authority over men. That's the way God designed it. And we looked at that as we looked at that passage. And the husband and one wife, and we got that. And then second, so it's a male. Second, these are essential, not optional. God says these are the qualifications for leadership in the church. It's essential, not optional. And there's twice in ours, in verse 2 and verse 7, it says he must. He must. Well, in the NIV, the New American Standard, and ESV, 4 times it says he must. It's there, just hasn't been printed. That intent is there. He must fill these requirements. So it's not optional. It's what God says. And this passage presents a profile of a leader, not of poor qualities from which to skim and pick, but he must meet all the criteria, all of it. And that's why I said one of the neatest thing I think could happen in a church is a leader be raised up right from within your church. I think that would be great because you've had more of a chance. You have a chance to pick a pastor. He comes in, picks 3 times. You ask him some questions, and then you make a decision. But you really don't know what he's like. Now, you can trust the Lord to work through that system. I believe that. But it's much nicer if you know a little bit more about them. So in most churches, what happens, we get an elder board or a pulpit supply committee, and they check with the previous church and say, what kind of guy was this? And I'll say what happened doesn't happen. When that doesn't happen, I was in Pennsylvania, in this church there, one of our guys, one of the guys in leadership, went to this church, and they picked a new pastor. This guy was a disaster. A nice, booming church, and wasn't long there wasn't a dozen people there. Because if you disagreed with him, guess what he did? He kicked you out of the church. And they couldn't get rid of him. So one day he left. The elders came, changed the locks, put his books and everything out on the front steps. That's the only way they could get rid of him. Now, I can't understand why a guy would want to go to church like that. Who would want to go to church where everyone hated you? And everyone was afraid to say anything. You see what I'm talking about? He looked good on paper. And so we asked the guy, he said, he wasn't part of the leadership that brought him in. He said, I guess they didn't check him out. And I said, I guess not. Here's your sign. And so here we go. And so those qualifications are there. Well, we're going to break them up into four different categories. So it kind of breaks it up a little bit. The verses 1 through 3 is the overseer's personal or inner life, what he's like. Number 2, his home life. What's he like at home with his wife and his children? If he has one, we'll see that in a minute. It doesn't mean you have to be married to be one of these positions, but if you are, you need to have a good what? Home life. And number 3, his church life. Number 4, what do the unsaved think about this guy? Do they know a little bit more about him than you do? What are his business dealings with the folks out there? And myself, being a bivocational pastor, I deal with a lot of people, a lot of different people. But you know what I do now in my older age? I say older, not old, but older. I'm getting old, but are we not all of us? But I find that most of my people I work for, guess what, are people I worked for before. Why? Because they learn that they can trust me to come and do the job that they asked me to do. They don't worry about me. They leave me keys. I have people that work on lake houses that live in Chicago, and they just give me a key. And I go to their house, and I do the things I'm going to do, and then when I get done, I send them a bill, and I give them their key back. But you just can't trust everyone like that today. They don't worry about me smoking in there, since I never did smoke anything. I did smoke a joint once, but that was more than I could handle. And so there we go. I'm being honest with you. I did drink a lot of alcohol, and people don't have to worry about me throwing a party. And I hear these where guys will come in and throw a party at someone else's property. And I can't believe anybody would do that. They don't worry about that. And the first thing I always tell them, I'm a pastor. And that can be good and it can be bad. But I try to tell them that so they can rest assured. And I get a lot of senior ladies that don't have husbands anymore that like to have someone that's not going to take advantage of them. And I always tell folks I'm not the cheapest, but I'm not the most expensive. And I said, I always put on my contract that everything's done to the homeowner's satisfaction. And so I try to do that. I try to have an honest report. And I can't think of anybody, and I've been in the business since I was 17 years old. I'm 67 now. And I've been in the business of working in other people's homes. And I can't think of anyone that I couldn't go back and work for again that would say, no, I wouldn't have that bum in my house. And so that's what we're talking about here. And I try to witness to everybody. I always take that opportunity because I'm a pastor, so it opens up doors, right? And I have unsaved people ask me to pray for them. I go into Menards and I have unsaved people ask me to pray for them. And so that's the kind of reputation we're talking about. And you can go into Menards and they all know me. They send me all kinds of work, Menards does. And almost everyone knows me that hasn't been fired, or left for other positions. Most everyone knows me there. And I try to have that kind of reputation. And I try to do that above board, just as Billy Graham used to have that. He wouldn't even ride in an elevator with a woman alone because he couldn't handle an accusation to wreck his reputation. And that's the kind of thing. He was open as far as business dealings, all that kind of stuff. So we'll cover that, and we'll cover verses 1 and 2, his personal life we're talking about. Paul begins with a few words for thinking about leaders. In verse 1, he said again, this is a faithful saying, if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. And I want to tell you, those two words are the same in the English, but they're different in the Greek. And the first desire is he sets his heart to seek after, to stretch out oneself for. He desires. There's an inner urge in there that wants to be a what? A deacon, or he wants to be an elder. He wants to be a preacher. Whatever it is, God puts that desire in there. And then the second one is a passionate compulsion. and taken together, they describe a man who hourly pursues the ministry because of a driving compulsion. Where at? On the inside. Because I've heard Dr. Jeremiah and Chuck Swindoll both say that if you don't really desire to be a pastor, don't become one. Because I guess even in the political world, you got to have thick skin sometimes. Because you're not going to make everybody happy. I have one of my favorite preachers out in Pennsylvania, Bob Regan, who used to pastor Bethany Chapel. He said when he came there, he started preaching the word and people started leaving like flies. He said they didn't want to hear that stuff. And he said, you know what I did? He said, I kept on preaching the word. He said they weren't happy with me. And he kept on preaching the word. And that's what we're talking about here, has that desire inside. An overseer, a bishop, an elder, a pastor. Here's what Philip Towner says about that term. Was first used outside the church to refer to a supervisor of various sorts. As a description of one level of church leadership, it appears in Acts 20:28 and again alongside deacons in Philippians 1:1 to judge the account of Paul's farewell meeting with the elders and of Ephesus and the instructions of Titus. The term overseer, bishop, depends on what translation you have, elder, pastor, refer to what? The same office. That's what we're trying to get at there. It's the same offer. That word overseer or bishop is episkopos, where we get the Episcopalians get their name. And it means overseeing as a sitting administrator, inspector, or financial manager. A pastor, an elder. And so in churches, the elders usually oversee the spiritual aspects of the church. They're overseers. They work on and bringing in new Sunday school classes, and being part of getting a new pastor, those kind of things. A deacon would be one who oversees the financial and physical care of the church, and we'll separate those later on. Pastor is a shepherd, one who leads and cares for the flock. You know, the only way you can lead and care for a flock is get to know who your flock is, right? You get to know. That's one thing I like about a little church. You know, we tease one another and we have fun, but we get to know one another. So you know what's going on in your flock. You know where there may be some needs spiritually. And you're there when you have a loved one pass. You're there when those kind of things happen, you know, and that's what a pastor does. He shepherds, he leads and cares. An elder is presbyters. Guess what? Where we get the word Presbyterian. And that is, which means old man. Oh boy. And that's not talking about age. It's talking about having experience in the spiritual realm. Because you can have gray hair and still be inexperienced in the spiritual realm. And even be a Christian. But he's talking about that. We're mature people with spiritual wisdom and experience. And quite a responsibility for pastors and elders. So aspiration isn't enough. A man must qualify. And so that first thing it says in here is he must be blameless. Verse 2, a bishop, an elder, a pastor, then must be blameless. A leader within the church should have a good reputation amongst believers. He must be above reproach in some translations. That doesn't mean he's perfect. If you want a perfect pastor, you better get looking. Because I don't qualify. I'm not afraid to tell you that. I'm not perfect. But I try to be above reproach. I try to have a good reputation inside the church. Nothing in life to point a finger at. Keeping short accounts. Focus on the spiritual life. That's what we're looking at there. And a good reputation is a good way to translate that. Includes being the husband of what? One wife. Husband of one wife. This requirement has some interpretive challenges over this whole thing. Does it mean that an overseer must be a married man, or can he be single? Number 2, if a man's wife dies and he remarries, is he disqualified? Number 3, how does divorce affect his credentials? Is this a prohibition against polygamy? So, as an explanation for you, Dwayne Lifton says this: the question is, how stringent a standard was Paul erecting for overseers, pastors, bishops, elders? Virtually all commentators agree that this phrase prohibits both polygamy and promiscuity, which are unthinkable for spiritual leaders in the church. Many Bible students say the words, a one-woman man or the husband of one wife, are saying that affections of an elder must be centered exclusively on his wife. And I'm going to tell you, that's a definition I hold to, a one-woman kind of man. He has affections for one woman. And I'm going to tell you, see, when I got into the ministry, and most of you know this, I was divorced before I was saved. So I had to address this question. When I came pastor at Charity Baptist Church, which is no longer there in Three Rivers, I asked the question about divorce. And do you qualify to be a pastor? I actually come there to be a missionary. But you know, even then I was challenged to missions, but I couldn't go out with a Baptist mission board because I had been what? Divorced. I had been divorced, so I couldn't. Well, then I went out with New Tribes Mission because they understood something a little different, and I believe what most commentators believe today, that that was before salvation. After salvation, I'm accountable to these qualifications, but before salvation, what happened to that? It was washed away, wiped out. I've been married for 45 years. And I think I can say that I'm a one-woman kind of man because I'm standing up here alive. And I'm just going to leave it there, Tom. Yeah. Tom's laughing because he knows what would happen if he was fooling around. And if he wouldn't be sitting there and laughing. And he wouldn't be looking at me either. Because, you know, it's really hard to see through two black eyes. And whatever other physical things that would happen to him. Many others hold, however, that phrase further prohibits any who have divorced and remarried from becoming overseers, as I just shared. The reasoning behind this view is usually that divorce represents a failure in the home. So that even though a man may forgive for any sin involved, he remains permanently disqualified for leadership in the congregation. You know what? I know some good men that still hold to that, and that's fine. I would not hold that against them. If that's their interpretation of this word here, or this phrase here, and if that's where you stand, that's all right. God will correct you when you get to heaven. But no, that's all right. I had a wonderful pastor out there, Pastor Regan, the same man that scared out all those people. When I was asked to become a trustee there instead of a deacon, they called them trustees. I don't know where they got that. That's from the business world, but anyhow, I was asked to become one. So he came to me, he says, John, he said, I can't allow that. You've been divorced. Good. I didn't desire that office, number one. I had more things going on, but you know what? I respected him for that. He came straight to me and told me that. He says, according to my understanding, this is where I am. I said, fine. Bob Regan was the most wonderful preacher that I've ever sat under. Just loved the guy. And so just before I left, heading for Papua New Guinea, which I never made, he came and he said, John, he said, guess what? He said, I've watched how your ministry has boomed in our church. He says, I've decided that if you want to become a trustee, you can become one. I thought that's pretty. Now that's the kind of leader that I'm talking about. Strong in his convictions, but understanding that maybe his interpretation wasn't quite as strict as it had to be. And so you just love a man like that. Then I told him, I said, well, you know what, Bob? I said, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. I called him Pastor Regan in the church, but I called him Bob when we were in private. That's, again, some upbringings there, right? I have people here that call me both. Call me Pastor John, some call me John, some call me Pastor. I'll come by anything but late for supper. And so I don't mind that. But and when I was first saved, that was just the way I called a Pastor Foster, Jerry Foster. I called him Pastor Foster. That was just the way it was. And there's nothing disrespectable, I believe, in either way. And so anyhow, blameless, not perfect, but maintain secular purity both in thought, life, and conduct. Number 2, as we wind down our time, he must be temperate, vigilant, it says in some. He exercises control no matter what the situation. He's alert. He's watchful. He's clear-headed. He's balanced. That's what this word means. The word nephilios, that he has a clarity of mind. A soberness. The opposite of every kind of fuzziness is what it means. As he sees things pretty clearly. And I'm going to tell you, when you're in the counseling ministry, you need to be able to see things. Because guess who's right when you counsel two people? They both are. They both think they're what? They're right. And so you got to kind of assess the situation and see how it works. Sometimes men are really overpowering and a woman really can't voice her opinion. And so you have to say, you know what? Maybe I need to talk to her for just a few minutes while you're out there in the hallway. Or it could be the other way around. I've seen it both ways. Hey, honey, hey, sister. We got to watch the word honey because I have a habit of using that, but that's not good. Could get a black eye out of that one too. But hey, sister, would you sit outside for just a little while I talk to your husband here and kind of get the picture of this? And so sometimes we counsel one, and then we put them together and we fight it out. But you know what I found out? A lot of times both people know what they should do, just haven't had anybody to encourage them to do it. And that's what a pastor does. Remember, he's leading, he's caring for his flock. That's this kind of guy. He's tempered, he's vigilant, sober in judgment. In other words, an overseer avoids self-indulgence. He's free from emotional extremism. Because I tell you what, I've been in some counseling sessions that have got pretty heated. And I wouldn't ever want to share some of the things I heard. Because I don't share those things because that's nobody else's business, right? When you come into a counseling session, that's nobody else's business between the pastor, these two people, and the Lord. Now, sometimes afterward, people will share when God heals that relationship. They'll share some of those emotional, steamy feelings they had and how God worked in their hearts to bring those things together, as such as even of a person who has had an affair. And I've counseled a couple of those, and that's hard, folks, to stay unattached to that, because I said, hey, why don't you kick that bum to the street? That's my personal feelings. What would you do with this lady who seems to be? But then I find out, maybe I know why now that he cheated. But doesn't make it right on either side, right? And so you mend those things and you watch God heal. Only God can heal those things. You know that? Because I think that a spouse cheating on the other spouse is one of the hardest things to ever get over. I told you I went through a divorce. You know what? I think God allowed me to do that so I know what a person feels like. I tell you, I was unsaved, but my heart was tore apart when I found out my ex-wife at that time was having an affair. Not only my heart, but my pride wasn't doing so well either. And then I hear of situations in the church today to find out your wife leaves you for another woman. Now, how's that one going to burn you inside? And then try to bring that back together? I can't do that, but God can. God can do anything. And so when we're looking for leaders, we're looking for men that are not perfect, but men who can help us in those kind of situations. A lot of elders do counseling. A lot of deacons do counseling. Even a lot of deaconesses do counseling. And there's another place for women in women's ministry. I think if it's possible, there's nothing better than a woman counseling another woman. Because she understands how they think. Guys, that's an amazing feature. Women think different than men. That's not anything new to anybody. God made them that way. God made one think out of one side of the brain and one think out of the other side of the brain. And sometimes us men, we don't think out of either side. I believe that. But guess what? Sometimes women don't either. We're all made out of the same mud, right? And God wired us in different ways so we would make a good pair. And sometimes those pairs, I just read a study that disproved that opposites attract. They said that is not true in marriage. They did a study all through history. I said, well, I could have told you that all the way along. But I know that opposites do attract, and sometimes that happens because God gives a woman some features that he knows the man needed to help him be a helpmeet. And so we're just looking for those kind of things.